Hello, this is Michael Hexter, and welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So, this episode I'm calling World Leaders Fail to Act on Unfolding Climate Catastrophe, Lack Moral Commitment to Protect. So, an episode with this title could have appeared anytime in the last 30 years or so, and it would have been correct, because world leaders have failed to act for 35 or 32 years at least, and or at least they've failed to act effectively. And I'll go into a little bit of detail about some delaying factors in that acting, but it comes down, I think, really to the last sentence or the last phrase of that title. They're lacking a fundamental moral commitment to protect their peoples, to protect other peoples as well, so to cooperate with other countries, with the international community, and to also protect future generations, or the young and future generations, who are not necessarily voting in their elections or otherwise fully aware of what's been going on over the last 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. So the reason why I'm, there are obvious reasons why I'm recording this episode right now, because in the last few months, and certainly in the last couple weeks or several weeks, we've seen extreme weather events, extreme heat throughout the world, various parts of the world, extreme precipitation, extreme violent storms in places where those storms have either never occurred or only very rarely occurred. And so in July 2023 should be a turning point in the world's recognition that the climate crisis is fully here, and that the climate systems of the world are in breakdown, that the Anthropocene is upon us, and the Holocene climate that gave rise to the human species and also human civilizations is over. And so we're facing a climate emergency, and so a global climate emergency, and also a climate emergency in any number of different countries. And the question is whether this climate emergency will be declared, and whether world leaders will act according to the dictates of that climate emergency. In other words, according to the necessary steps to protect their populations from the effects of humanity's use of fossil fuels, and also changes in land use over the past century and a half, let's say, but in particular intensifying over the last 50 years or so. But again, starting from the time of the Industrial Revolution, maybe even 180 years ago. So, and that requires a clarity of vision, and also a commitment to protect populations, protect their peoples as a whole, protect, again, as I was saying, future generations. And we see that I think the fundamental missing ingredient is that moral commitment, and that there are some public education issues in some wealthy countries where people fear, in acting upon climate, that they will lose certain privileges they have, certain consumption patterns that they've become used to, pleasures that they've become attached to, including myself. I count myself in among the people who are responsible for this catastrophe. As I've talked about in an essay, and I think also I made a video about this maybe about a year ago on this channel, that I am among the group what I'm calling people who are secondarily responsible for climate chaos, for the climate catastrophe. Those who are primarily responsible are the world leaders and the large corporations that made the decisions, and also especially the fossil fuel industry. In fact, within that group of primarily responsible people, there's probably a super responsible group of, you could call them climate criminals, who have really engineered the crisis in the last 50 years. And when it became clear from the science that this would happen, or some of these, not in every detail, as it's become clearer in the last 30 years or so, as climate science has become more well-defined. But nevertheless, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, there was a understanding that simply from the laws of thermodynamics and the greenhouse effect which was discovered in the late 19th century, that this would happen because of our use of fossil fuels, and then also discovered as well via changes in the way we use land and deforestation and emissions from basically forestry and agriculture, and other land use changes that we've made. So anyway, and there are many different ways to talk about this, what is going, why the people who are, now I'm among the, as I'm calling them, secondarily responsible, the consumers in the wealthy nations who become used to the benefits of use of fossil fuels and the services they provide, to do things like travel and like have comfortable homes, based, using heating and cooling devices and using copious electricity. But anyway, I am not one of the designers of that system, and in the last 15 years, I've been trying to point out we need to transition from that system to another system. So I am at least one of those people who are trying to change it, and to make and to try to put out information that shows us the pathway to do that. That shows us that it's not a matter of simply wearing sackcloth and ashes and mourning, or some kind of a moral purification process that we need to do. I think we need to become more moral in general as people, to care more about the world, to care more about other species, to care more about each other, to care more about the young, about people who have not yet been born. So anyway, so all of those things, we need to be more caring about those things, but and that requires a certain, let's say, graduation, or in terms of our awareness as a species and how we act and so forth and so on. But we have been misled by leaders who are also not looking out for us. So in other words, we have been misled and by industries that have been putting out information when they knew better, information that distracted us, that told us not to worry, or that actually actively hid the consequences of our actions, or the actions of our system overall. In other words, so we don't entirely choose every day to reshape the world according to our own consciences. It's impossible for most individuals to do that. It requires often great wealth to live a certain level of or great ability to give up either responsibilities or to reshape one's world, to create a tiny utopia or whatever that's not emitting net carbon, so forth and so on. Obviously, sometimes it's a laudable task that people do if they have the resources to do that for themselves, and they create a kind of a test case for people who have less resources or governments to create a net zero homes, to create passive houses with solar panels on them, so forth and so on. But anyway, that process of changes has to be a collective one, and it needs to be hinged on politics. And so the critical point, the point of failure in our current system, in our current time, is the moral commitment, or the lack of moral commitment, of leaders in the world, including Joe Biden, including members of Congress in the United States, to act decisively on climate, to declare a climate emergency, to start a aggressive program of mobilizing resources to transform our energy system, our land use system, so forth and so on, to with a massive participation on the part of people, on the part of corporations, and to create that new system that's not fossil based, that's not based on fossil inputs, including things like plastics, and so petrochemicals as well. But so, in other words, that leaves fossil fuels in the ground eventually, but stepwise, reducing and eliminating our dependence on those things in a rapid manner, very rapid manner. And so that is a contingent upon government policy and the use of the funds that government can mobilize, especially governments that are monetarily sovereign, or even multi-government entities like the Eurozone. They could also do the same thing or a similar thing, given if they are freed from the strictures of the Maastricht Treaty and the ECB's austerity policies, essentially, for European countries that use the euro. So, but anyway, they could be mobilizing resources to do this, but they are not. So some people portray this as, and it's true, that these corrupt leaders, or semi-corrupt and corrupted leaders, or cautious leaders, or timid leaders, are in the thrall of fossil fuels and the interests that surround the use of fossil fuels, including business as usual in our nations. In other words, they may or may not be taking bribes or illegal campaign contributions from fossil fuel entities, or their parties may not be beholden to those fossil fuel dependent industries that are making money, that are capitalist entities that are driven to maximize their profits. And they are currently, some of them are gradually sort of shifting the basis of their capital, their physical capital, so it's no longer so fossil dependent. Others are by necessity, because they're fossil fuel companies, that they need to amortize, they need to maximize their existing real capital investments in oil wells and oil tankers and so forth and so on. So they are entirely dependent on keeping and pumping out as much oil and gas and coal, and mining as much coal out of the ground to as they can before the window on them shuts. And the window shutting is based on a combination of popular pressure, but the moral commitment of leaders is where the lever of that pressure is applied. In other words, it's leaders can anticipate and can invite that kind of pressure by saying, "I'm open to doing this," make me do this, as Franklin Delano Roosevelt was supposedly said to some labor leaders in the 1930s. So it's not just there are theories of history that say, well, it's only social movements that create change. Well, it's a combination of social movements with leadership, government leadership often, that is open to, or at least not adamantly repressing and militarily repressing those social movements. In other words, that is not committed to the opposite vision of a top-down hierarchical decision-making where they serve, in our case, in the case of our civilization, the interests of capital, the interests of fossil fuel capital, and or those fraction of capital that are unwilling to take a leap and say, we can do without dirt cheap fossil fuels, or whatever the current cost of fossil fuels is we can deal with that because we are committed to saving the planet for humanity, and we will forego every convenience that we have currently that is based on fossil fuels, that we will undergo the rigors of transitioning, and we will help out as much as we can, or we will not fight you. Okay, we will not fight you. We will not try to inspire a coup or fund militias that will attempt to overthrow you if you attempt to do this transition. Okay, and so, but there are forces in the United States in particular which are very committed to this fossil fuel lifestyle, and also there's a whole ideology wrapped up in it. It's with the MAGA movement and Fox News and so forth and so on, that have created an idol out of fossil fuels, as symbolized by, for instance, the coal rolling, truck that is ostentatiously polluting the air, and advertising that it's using fossil fuels by essentially, creating a plume of smoke that is not unnecessary for the operation of that vehicle, but is an attempt to advertise to be poisonous on purpose, to be destructive on purpose. So, but anyway, we need in the United States, let's talk about the United States specifically, we need a leader or leaders that are willing to face down those forces that are committed to destruction, committed to ignoring, committed the signals of the climate system are funded in part or by fossil fuel interests, or by those who identify with fossil fuels in some perverse way, in some distorted and morally unsupportable way, in an evil way, you could say, in a way that prefers destruction over change, prefers destruction over recognition that one needs to change. That they are too proud. They are too proud of nothing to be proud of, but they're too stuck. They're too stubborn. They're too immured in their existing ways, and that they don't, and they feel like any recognition that they need to do something slightly different. And this goes for, you see this in a broad range of issues, for instance, like, pronouns or something, or the presence of a book in the library that suggests that, gay people exist, and there could be gay parents, and, they could raise a perfectly, happy child, and so forth and so on. So I'm using that as an example of the rejection of in the United States, in particular, of the neo-fascist movement in the United States, and its stubborn insistence on trying to kill change in any form, even slight change, that sort of that would suggest that suggests that you could you would need to do something different, and which would be acknowledgement of having done in the past something that you may not be proud of, or that our nation might not be proud of. And so this goes on and on. So in any case, that movement that is signaling to its opposition and to the world that it doesn't want to change anything, that requires, on the part of those people who want to act on climate, a great deal of bravery and a great deal of moral commitment to protecting the people of the United States from the use of fossil fuels, from in other words, protecting us from the impacts of the use of fossil fuels over the last 200 years, but then also to phase that out as quickly as possible. And unfortunately, the current occupant of the White House shows a lack of courage in this area, a lack of commitment, a lack of moral vision, and a lack of bravery to face down those forces, or for that matter, he may not want to in a number of different ways. So it's not. It may not be a lack of bravery. It may be just a lack of commitment, period, to any project of change or of that simply. But what's required, though, is a moral commitment to protect. So that is what leadership should be not only aspiring to, should represent, that we are trying to protect our people, and they are not doing that. And so let me just, I've mentioned this in other episodes, but or in writings in the last 15 years or so, but the neoliberal era has eviscerated in many countries, not just the United States, the idea that government leaders are there to protect the people. Now, there are certain areas where they still are supposed to protect. So against military strikes from other countries, they still have this moral commitment, or they still have this idea that it's politically unthinkable that one would allow. Now, this is the source, in a way, of the insanity of the Bush administration in fomenting the Iraq War as an overreaction to the 9/11 attacks, and as a false, essentially a false cover-up, or of cover-up's the wrong word. That it was a substitute for, or is a grand overreaction to, and an ineffective way to deal with the issues that caused 9/11, the 9/11 attacks to the United States. But anyway, the government leaders of the United States still have this moral commitment to protect against this sort of foreign attack on Americans of a certain type. Now, there are other attacks on Americans, which are, or for instance, the insidious undermining of our U.S. government by commitment to foreign interest groups that are paying U.S. lawmakers, for instance, from Saudi Arabia, from Israel, so forth and so on. That is actually been undermined. So in a way, I'm not saying that's even being upheld as that the U.S. the political leadership of the United States is conscientiously upholding this idea of attack from foreign countries, or just protection from foreign influence, and in the sense of undermining or secretive or whatever it is efforts to undermine the sovereignty of the United States. But the climate crisis is calling upon world leaders to protect their countries, protect the world, protect the common climate. Okay, and so it is a little bit more amorphous. It doesn't have the same old style protective drama in your mind, the imagination in your head of saying, I'm a soldier and I'm protecting, or I'm a general and I'm organizing soldiers to protect, or I'm a president who's telling the generals to protect the country from attack. So it comes from the problem with the climate crisis. It comes from everywhere. It comes from within. It comes from without. It's about our style of using energy and land, and how our way, not style sounds superficial. Our techniques, our technologies for using these things, and the energy that those technologies are powered by, that is why we're here. So it requires a level of abstraction that many in their political imagination have a difficulty grasping. So that's one challenge, but it's still protecting, and it's still it should be easy for a world leader to call on that protective role that is based in part on military preparedness, or that is a cognate, you could say, a cousin of that military preparedness idea and the military protective function of a government. That is something that can be used and can be mobilized. But unfortunately, neoliberalism has created, or the neoliberal era, the climate crisis emerged within the neoliberal era. And what happened was that the Kyoto Protocol, the UN system that emerged in the 1990s, created a system that was supposedly going to protect us from climate change by using the precepts of neoclassical economics, in the form of markets being this sort of ideal mechanism for doing things, and that mechanism could be used to protect us from climate catastrophe. In any case, that obviously has failed. It didn't draw on, or it sort of reassured world leaders that all you have to do is leave it in the hands of the market, according to this cap and trade instrument that was the central piece of it is the central piece of the Kyoto system, and that you wouldn't have to do anything differently. You just sort of let that happen, and it was never well thought through. It was never fully. It just simply was based on the ideology of neoliberalism and on economics, on supposedly scientific economics, that was never intended to change the fundamental infrastructure of society. Okay, that never was designed that way, and is itself a false picture of an ordinarily functioning capitalist economy of any description. It's bad social science overall, but in any case, it's celebrated as being respectable and so forth and so on, filled with. So it's about a lot of fraudulent science in the area of social sciences, that this massive problem, this existential problem, was given to, and so that created diffuseness and a sense of that the climate was this sort of something you say, well, if we sign the Kyoto system, if we commit ourselves to Kyoto, everything will be okay. And but their government, so additionally on top of Kyoto, on top of this idea, was that fossil fuel interests were even trying to undermine that, and were trying to in the United States, and particularly in a fossil fuel exporting country or extracting country like the United States, a big one like like us and Australia and Russia and countries in the Middle East, that even that was too much. Even the phony, imperfect, or not even imperfect, form of paying lip service to climate action was even too much for those industries. So they worked on undermining and funding climate denial, forces and so forth and so on. So any action on climate change was considered to be too much in those countries. So those two things combined to undermine what should have been a straightforward commitment to protecting the population of the country, the natural bounty of any country, and also the future prospects of the people in that country. That was obscured, and so we're at a point now where we have leaders who have grown up within that era who don't feel that strong sense of commitment to their peoples, commitment to protecting them in this way, who have grown up thinking that economics works like the neoliberal, neoclassical economics. And so it's a matter of just sort of trading. It's a transactional thing. It's not a rule-based thing. It's not a deontological thing. It's not something where you have a commitment to a rule. It's an idea, well, it's all contingent. It's all about deals I strike with other people. And whoever the powerful is, let's strike a deal with them, rather than saying we have to deal with, in this case, laws of physics that are being pushed in a certain way by our activity, and we have to look at our infrastructure and so forth and so on, and how we need to change it, and we need to implement policies that do that. And in each country, that would look slightly different, because it's not a one-size-fits-all system for every country in terms of how you address the energy use and energy production and so forth and so on of that country, and also the land use. So anyway, so that commitment to that inner moral commitment is something that is lacking, and is not something that's talked about as much as I think it should be. And this is lacking. This is a fundamental. It infuriates me to see leaders like Joe Biden, or like before him, Barack Obama, or obviously Donald Trump. Obviously the Republicans are even, they're doing the exact opposite of what needs to be done. But there are people who mouth commitment to something about climate. So what I've called soft climate denial, and they have sort of say, well, we kind of want to do something about climate, but we're not going to really do what we really need to be doing. We're not going to really commit to doing it. So we had today Joe Biden talk about the hot climate and so on and so on, about the problems it was causing, without mentioning fossil fuels, without declaring a climate emergency. And this is just simply a lack of moral commitment to. There's no other way around it. It can't be, even though the alternative we have in terms of, if we look at the Republican Party, is a party that is totally lacking in moral, that try to undermine any discourse of any kind of moral commitment to doing anything about climate, and they try to erase it. So it's unfortunately like being a child faced with whatever parents you have, and whatever, but you're not free to choose a third parent because you're dependent on these. And right now in the United States, unfortunately, because of our two-party system and a bunch of different other reasons, we are faced with this. But anyway, still, looking objectively, there's a commitment to perverting everything about climate change on the part of the Republicans. They are perverting morality, and then we have a weak and inconstant lack of moral commitment on the part of the Democrats. The sense that we're being manipulated and played, and that's something that has turned people against. They say, well, they prefer the Republican total commitment to anti-morality. Okay, so to what I would call evil. Okay, certainly secular evil. It's not religious evil. It's not supernatural evil. It's just plain and simple destructiveness, human destructiveness. So anyway, we need to be talking more about the moral commitment of leaders, and also because the movements that need to act, the movements like Climate Defiance, which is doing a great job of pointing this out and pressuring leaders in Washington, and also Ultima Generazione in Italy, and Just Stop Oil in England, and Letzte Generation in Germany, and Dernière Rénovation in France, and there are in other countries as well. Greta Thunberg, I'm sorry, is also part of just a movement in Sweden that's similar to this in terms of creating through civil disobedience this moral pressure on leaders to do the right thing, or to do a righter thing. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to stop here, and I hope you can share your thoughts in the comments, and maybe we can have a discussion there. Please like the video if you think this is a contribution to this discourse, and also please subscribe to Politics 2100. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.